Today, this week, Steve, I'm calling it the unrelenting progress of winner-takes-all economics, because we know companies are getting bigger and bigger, and it feels like, we might just end up with 5 companies at the end of all of this, and the harm that that's doing to society and our inability to prevent that harm. And also, there's lots of different levels to this. First of all, people are getting paid bad wages, people are losing their jobs, we've got less consumer choice as a result of this, because we've got lots of anti-competitive behavior, which seemingly is going unchecked. We've got these companies making extraordinary profits, and the money is being confined to a handful of people. And then actually, ultimately, the products are just a bit shit, aren't they?
There's shitification. I think there's a Corey doctor came up with that term. It's a bloody accurate description of what's happening with the products we rely upon from these giant corporations these days.
Well, for example, this is our second take today because your system froze up.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're not using... Yes, exactly. Yeah. And my experience with Microsoft was this week, which took ages to fix. And there's the thing, we're spending our time and they're making extraordinary profits delivering crap products. Microsoft Windows Defender, which, I didn't ask to be on my computer.
That product is produced by Microsoft, isn't it?
By Microsoft.
Windows Defender.
On Microsoft Windows, decided that there were 2 applications that it would stop allowing me to save into a particular directory from these 2 apps because it wasn't sure these 2 apps were safe enough. All the other apps that I use, like a lot of Adobe products, are all fine, but the 2 products it wouldn't allow me to, the 2 bits of software it wouldn't allow me to save into these directories were Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel.
Obviously, you didn't try Microsoft PowerPoint. They would have given you 3.
Yes. So Microsoft was stopping Microsoft products getting into a Microsoft directory on Microsoft Windows because Microsoft wasn't satisfied that its own products were safe. That's...
I know.
You can't make it up.
It would be funny if it wasn't tragic. And I've just recently experimented with Linux, and I'm deciding whether I go Linux or Windows completely. And my reason was occasionally I'd start Windows, and I was actually even luckier than you. Okay, rather than just being told that it was insecure, they wouldn't start. I'd start Microsoft, and sometimes PowerPoint and Word would work, and sometimes I'd click on them, and I just got a bit of finger exercise. Nothing actually started. And these frustrations just seem to be getting worse and worse, and that's where the term shitification comes from.
Yeah, I think it's very appropriate. Look, I spent a long time on it. In the end, I used Microsoft's Copilot to try and explain to me what was going on, and it did, in the end, resolve the whole issue. But I did say... Now, you're going to love this, right?
Yeah.
Because if an employer said this, they'd be sacked. But Copilot can say it. I said, why is Microsoft so shit? And it said, look, the very thing, this is word for word, right? The very thing that makes Microsoft dominant, its sprawling, tangled, ancient ecosystem, is the same thing that causes nonsense like Windows being blocked by Windows Defender, Office losing permissions to its own folders, updates breaking workflows, notifications disappearing before you click them, because that was another problem, settings getting buried under 14 layers of menus, inconsistent behavior between apps. This is, and I quote, a Microsoft app saying it's a giant creaking machine held together by duct tape, backwards compatibility, and sheer market inertia. That's Microsoft telling me.
That's a quote.
Yeah. That is Microsoft's AI system telling me what it thinks of the company it's created by. So at least they know.
At least, I mean, this is one of my, the guy that does my cartoons with Miguel Guerra, the cartoonist behind 7 Robots. He talks about America being the duct tape empire.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely, you got an empire held together by duct tape. Yeah. And this is certainly what's happening with Windows. And this is, you just have layers, and this is, in some ways, this is not something you can blame on capitalism or a particular company. It's the way in which we put computers together in the very first instance, because and we invented these things, back in the 40s and 50s, and it actually they began to crack. This is one of the crazy things. They began to crack security codes. Enigma, cracking the German communication system on their submarines, was a major reason for the invention of the first computers. So we know it was about security and stuff that was absolutely critical at the beginning. But when all this stuff began in the 50s and 60s, in terms of passing over to personal computers and so on, there was a sort of an anarchist, lovey-dovey lefty element to the community, and in some ways they didn't want security. So right from the very beginning, you don't have security, so you've got to put a security layer on top of that, and then arbitrary decisions were made because there was no awareness of the way the hardware would expand. Bill Gates is responsible for one of my favorites, and that was shoving when you can only access a megabyte of RAM, a megabyte, not a gigabyte, for those of the youngins in the audience. When you can only exercise original personal computers, 32K, then 64K, and
I
then
had a
finally
32
1 megabyte.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he put the operating system at 640 meg, and everything was above that, and that confined you to 640 K, pardon me, of program space. So you had to hack around that. So there's so many elements of just silly decisions made at some point, which we hack and hack and hack and hack around on top of, and then AI looks and says, this is even more of a mess than me.
Yeah, and so it says, I'll guide you through this whole process because I understand how big a mess it is, and it's prepared to publicly say that. I don't know whether Microsoft are aware that their AI machine is saying stuff like that, but I think it is an economic failure because what we're talking about is a system where something's been built, there's a layer built on top, which is sort of like a fix of what's needed. And then on top of that, you put something else and something else. And you just keep on adding layers, which is a layer on top of something which is already broken. So ultimately, you've got a system which is just a complicated mix of fixes. Whereas in a very competitive world, someone would come along and say, do you know what? That's a mess over there. We're going to create something which is much cleaner and simpler and works better. And we're going to take loads of market share off them. I mean, why isn't there somebody doing a Microsoft Office? Because everybody already has Microsoft Office.
No, there are people doing it, but they're just not quite good enough to displace. And like that,
it's quite a low bar, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's quite a low bar, though, isn't it?
You would think so, but like, for example, with Linux, and I thought Linux would support Bluetooth, just like Windows does, and I find that there are Bluetooth devices that Linux doesn't recognize. So you have all your stuff set up for Windows, you try to make the migration to Linux, and then you find your Bluetooth devices don't work. Not all of them, but some of them. And equally, when you want, there are alternatives, but again, the way Microsoft designed Word, and this is stuff I've known from speaking to people in Microsoft at various times, and back when I was a computer journalist for 20 years in Sydney. And they tell me that if you want to clone Microsoft Word, like if you want to read a Microsoft Word file, then you have to have a program which clones Microsoft Word because there are so many little complications inside Word. For example, one is that Word does not distinguish between styles for paragraphs and styles for letters. So you can you can have a style sheet as with the way that formatting is done in professional desktop publishing packages, and that means you say you have a style marker. So so at title, which is what Ventura Publisher used to use, at title, curly brackets, that's the title, all the text inside there. But equally, other programs used to say, let's just highlight text and change what it looks like. And Microsoft mixed the two. And so it ends up, if you want to actually be able to read a Microsoft document and reproduce exactly what it looks like in Microsoft Word, you have to clone the entire program.
Yeah.
And then therefore there's things like, for example, there's what's it called? There's a word processor in the Linux world, OpenOffice, which is it tends to be a clone of Microsoft Office. And it's great for Word documents pretty well, but it's useless, not quite useless, but it stuffs up PowerPoint files. So if I make the migration, I've got to sacrifice all the work I've put into doing PowerPoint animations in my thousands of PowerPoint files. And you get locked in by your own history. So your capacity to move away from one person to another just isn't there. You've and this is the dependency that we don't have with a car, like we didn't have with a car, because you can change to one car to another, and still put petrol into the car. Back in the days of internal combustion engine cars. So there's not a dependency between the vehicle you've purchased and the fuel you use for it. But in things like computers, there is a dependency. So if you want to change from one vehicle to another, go from Ford to Toyota in the cars, that's easy. If you want to go from Microsoft Word to another, oh my God, the cost you face is so great, you're locked in.
And just you wait, it's going to hit cars. Right? Apple will start making cars, and if your car, you can't open your car or get your car started, you're going to have to find someone who's got an Apple device so that you can actually log into your car and change your password. It all just gets more complicated for the consumer. But look, there's lots of repercussions out of all of this. This isn't just a whinge fest about how bad Microsoft are, and by the way, they are. But how do they get to be so big? And because companies are getting bigger, and the repercussions for this in terms of anti-competitiveness, how they're screwing workers, how they are screwing other companies. There's a myriad of effects out of all of this, and they are obviously very pronounced. And is it just going to get worse? And regulators seem to be so far behind the eight ball on this, they just can't keep up with regulation. So in the 1930s, let me give you some numbers. 1% of US corporations held 70% of all corporate assets. By 2018, it had risen from 70 to 97% of all assets. Now, we look at the top 0.1% over that same period, they rose from 47% to 88%. So 88% of assets in America held by 0.1% of companies. So the other 99.9% of companies held 12% between them, which is staggering. But that is 2018. I can't give it beyond 2018 because there's no IRS data in the US available for that.
This is for the Internal Revenue Service. So
yeah.
Is that wealth or income flow?
This is the value of the company, the assets held by these companies. So if you add together, just the value of the company, basically, how the companies are valued. But if we look beyond 2000, so I mean, that's just a staggering statistic, isn't it? And then if we look at what's happened since 2018, S&P companies, since 2018, the top 10% were 20% of the value, the capital value of all the S&P 500 companies. 20% was accounted for by the top 10. It's 37% now. So it's almost those top 10 have almost doubled the value within the S&P. And in those 8 years, Amazon is 3 times bigger in terms of market cap. Microsoft is 4 times bigger. Apple is 5 times bigger. I mean, we're only talking 8 years.
It's a huge increase, yeah.
NVIDIA is 20 times bigger. If we look at shares from 2018 to 2026, NVIDIA has grown 3,680%. Tesla is up 1,800%. AMD, all the chip makers, basically, and electric car makers, up 1,800%. So we've got a lot of people getting very rich. Well, not a lot of people, actually. We've got a few
tiny number of people
getting very rich from all of this. And it's only going to get worse. This is a trend, isn't it? It's not stopping. It's only going to get worse, where the big companies get bigger and all the rest are fighting for market share with very little money between them. And the majority of the population not even involved in this race. They're just being left behind. I mean, how do you stop it?
Well, I mean, there is always a tendency to concentration of power in a capitalist economy. And the reason is even simple. If you just imagine like a random distribution, we all chuck a certain number of coins to each other, depending on what we produce. We chuck more at let's use Count Binface's favorite musician, Adele. Okay, we throw extra money at Adele than she throws back at us, so that you get a concentration of power coming out of that. And the real world process is an evolutionary process of competition, and in that evolutionary process, some companies get an advantage, and that sort of locks them into large scale, and then others are trying to take over the same regions. So they come into small competitors, and you get what's called a power law distribution. And this is a sign of a normal industry. It's completely left out of economics textbooks, and I'll talk about that later maybe. But what you get is if you do a graph the size of firms on the horizontal axis and the percentage of firms of that size on the vertical axis, and make both your scales logarithmic, so you go 1, 10, 100, 1,000, that sort of thing, rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, you get a straight line between the two. And that's what's called a power law, and that's a sign of basically a healthy evolutionary process. What we're getting now is there are products which depend upon other products. or products which depend upon your past history of consumption, and therefore you can't break away from them. And then when a company gets dominant, like for example, I hate Facebook, for example, but everybody's on Facebook, and therefore if you want to have a competitor for social media, I don't want to have two. It's bad enough having one. And then the same thing happens with other little
Well,
products.
yeah,
So
and
you get
you look at Twitter, the where what he couldn't have done more, could he? Really, Elon Musk, to try and get people off Twitter.
yeah,
Anybody of sound mind, and so was it Blue Sky? What's it called? Blue
Blue
Sky
Sky.
Forum?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
other
Blue
one. Yeah.
Sky, and yeah, it just didn't take off, did it? Because
No,
it
and they
was
can't, because you face such a resistance, because it isn't just the product, is the people you can access through it. So you get lock-in from the fact that there's what's called a network effect. If one of the few ways when economists try to handle this, they call these network goods. And this is quite true. Once you've got network goods dominating, then you can't easily get out. So if you let's imagine the car industry, and consider the car industry, following a power law distribution of a few big companies at the top, lots of small ones at the bottom. The, um, the possibility of becoming one of the big ones is what attracts the small ones. Okay. Now the thing is, you can displace forward with, all you need is a road, okay, to drive a car on. So the vehicle itself, you can change the vehicle, but when you come to the software world, you need all your friends are currently on that particular service system. So you've got the Facebook road and the Twitter road and so on, and you simply can't leave it, because part of the access is that other people use it, and therefore you get lock-in, and you'll get a super power law. So the percent of this, actually going the other end of the line in that case. But the small number of large firms becomes larger even than a power law, and then you're locked into not an evolutionary process. You're locked into lock-in, and you can't get out of these products.
yeah, which is so Tesla is one of the big companies that doesn't have that advantage, which is why they're looking at how they diversify into other things like making robots and all that sort of stuff, which are arguably completely unrelated to what has been their core deliverables so far. So they aren't. I mean, they're growing through just trying stuff, I guess. I mean, they don't have the same advantage as the other.
No, and like this,
big
you
players.
would have seen. I mean, going back about a decade, Elon Musk was asked what he thought about BYD, and he laughed. Have you seen their cars? Ha ha ha! He's not laughing anymore. And
No.
so, in a manufacturing world, then you don't get this potential lock-in, because all cars use the same thing, a road. So it's easy for a different type of car to come in and take over the road. But when you have the sort of ecosystems we have with the computer world and network goods, then once Facebook dominates, you can't get rid of Facebook. Once Twitter dominates, even as shitty as Musk has made it, as you say, you can't break away from it.
Yeah.
And the regulators are completely useless, because they often they get locked into the current dominant platform. But you'd have to overcome not the companies but the network effect, and that's almost impossible, because like to make Blue Sky instantly feasible rather than Twitter, you'd need to have a communication road they all used, and you could get through Twitter, or you can get through Blue Sky, and that doesn't happen.
Well, so maybe it should. Maybe that's we'll look at regulation in just a moment, and maybe how some of this should be tackled. But also, I mean, when we come back after the break, a lot of people, as we say, so a very small number of people earning a lot of money, and there's a lot of people not earning very much money at all, and it is causing this massive income divide globally. So let's put some numbers behind that when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast. So, Steve, NVIDIA is the biggest company in the world, and yet it employs just 42,000 people. It makes $2.9 million per person who works for them, and they're paid on average quite well. They're paid on average 160,000 each.
That is quite high, yeah.
People. But it's not 2.9 million. Whatever happened to the marginal productivity theory of wages? That seems to have gone out the window on this. I mean, aren't wages supposed to be determined that they are pretty close to, just allow a small amount for profit from the company, and that's how much you're going to get paid? So really, you shouldn't be on 40. What is it? You shouldn't be on 160,000. You should be on, well, let's call it 2.6 million, and leave 0.3 million as profit for the company. What's gone wrong there?
The theory is nonsense, and this is one of the reasons why our economists and regulators simply can't understand, can't control the real world. They're working with a mythical model of how firms actually operate, and this is like the one thing I criticize in debunking economics, and I'm doing much more in forthcoming books. But they have a mythical view of the cost structure of firms, and that mythical view tells them that all firms face rising production costs. So at a certain point, the firm realizes if it sells any more units, it loses money. So it stops at a certain size. That's the theory they have. Now, that is garbage, absolute total garbage.
Well, it would apply for a farm. It would apply in agriculture, wouldn't it? If you've got so many fields, you reach the extent of those fields, you can't plant more. You could use more fertilizer and get a bit more out of it, but it would progressively get more expensive.
It even applies to the way they think about farms, because they assume that firms are using all their fixed capital at all times. Okay, and so that and this is, if you read a textbook, I mean, I'd actually recommend reading the Grimm, the brothers Grimm, rather than a textbook, because at least you'll get a few laughs out of it. But they're both fantasies, and the fantasy they'll teach is that firms have what they call fixed capital and variable inputs, and the fixed capital is machines, variable inputs is basically labor. So let's imagine you got just to give a hypothetical, a company that has a particular machine that uses 10 workers. It needs 10 workers to be managed efficiently. And the textbooks will tell you that, and they say 10 of those machines. Okay. Well, what the firm does, it has its very first worker comes in and he runs around the whole 100 machines. Okay. And then you get the 10 workers. Oh, thank God, each worker can work just this one machine, and has to do, each one has the 10 stations for each of those machines. And then you finally get to the stage where you've got 10 machines and 100 workers. I may have stuffed up my numbers there, but it's all mythical, so let's just keep going. You've got 10 machines, 100 workers. You get maximum productivity per worker at that point. Then if you want to produce more than that, you've got to have 11 workers per machine and 12 workers per machine and so on. And each worker adds a bit more to production, but not as much as the one beforehand. That means you're paying the same wage to all of them. They're getting less output per unit. That means your marginal cost rises. And that at a certain point, the marginal cost rises to equal the price. And therefore, if you produce more than that amount, you lose money. So your marketing director rings up all the marketing staff and says, stop selling. We've reached the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. If we sell any more, we'll lose money. So please stop selling. Now, any marketing director, and you know this for a fact, who said stop selling would be sacked on the spot. Okay, it's a mythical view of the real world. So in the real world, same example.
In that example, you just get another machine, wouldn't you?
No, yes, in the real world you would. But when your starting position, if you had 10 machines and one worker, you'd have one worker on that one of the 10 machines, leave the other 9 idle. When you get to 10 workers, you'd have those 10 workers working on one machine, and then your 11th worker would start on one of the other machines. That's the practical way to go. That gives you higher output per worker to begin with, compared to what the theory teaches of running all the machines at once, which is just nonsense. But the real world, firms know that first of all, firms know their variable costs, so they build a prototype and they know the cost of the prototype, and they price by putting a markup on the price of the prototype. That's how they set prices. But what they do is they have spare machines, because you're in a competitive market. It's an uncertain world. You don't know what's going to happen. If one of your competitors stuffs up, or you produce something, if a differentiated product gives you an advantage over your rivals that they're not ready for, you've got to have the capacity to expand into the extra marketplace. So firms deliberately have excess capacity. This has been found by dozens of surveys. So excess capacity means you never strike the situation of too many workers per machine. But if you read in economic textbooks, they literally talk about people queuing up to use machines. That's their vision of and that's nonsense. That's not the average factory at all. But what it means is, in the real world, because you set your price as a markup on your variable cost of production, and they're either constant or falling, and therefore there's always a gap between the price and your variable costs. You always make a sort of profit per unit on sales, and your fixed costs are falling all the way out. The fixed cost per unit obviously decline. The more you produce, the lower the fixed cost per unit are. That means that you get the more you sell, the more advantage you get. And then if you take sales away from your rivals who are selling a differentiated product that you compete with, like in cars, take Musk's example, petrol cars versus ice cars versus electric. You come in with a new element, you undercut your rivals, you expand. And what this means is there's an evolutionary advantage to becoming a dominant player because you get higher profit per unit as well as selling more sales. And that gives you this what's called a power law distribution of firm sizes. So that's the real world. Now, what
And
we're
it's
getting,
even more so
yeah,
now, of course,
yeah,
because the marginal cost of producing extra, if you've written a bit of software, I mean,
yeah.
all the cost is in writing the software. The marginal cost is next to buggery.
We're
So
getting a significant marginal cost in power inputs into data centers right now. But generally speaking, yeah, that's true. There's, particularly when we used to, Microsoft used to sell the product. We bought the box and installed it using a CD on our machine, and we had the CD, and that Microsoft couldn't disable it. That's very different now, where they're trying to get you to license the bloody stuff, and you can only access it if you're paying the money all the time. And the thing is, once you've got this huge investment of, and I'm certainly in the situation that tens of thousands of Word documents and PowerPoint files and Excel files and so on, I can't use another program to open them reliably. I mean, and therefore you can't get that easy breakaway because I need the ecosystem that I've already developed, and that locks you in. So rather than getting this what's called a power law distribution, you get a super power law where there's a tiny bunch continue dominating, and our regulators haven't even got the mindset to understand what's going on. And also, of course, it is incredibly difficult to get people away from goods products where it's the network of people you interact with, which is locked up as well. So if you want to talk to people on Twitter, you can't do it through Blue Sky. And so all
yeah,
these things mean you're locked into a particular products and they become more and more dominant.
and that lock-in is part of the problem, isn't it? So there
Yeah.
does need to be, I mean, an easy way around that, because but the regulators are so far behind it. There has to be some sort of open standard. There has to be something that says that Microsoft, if you sell Microsoft Word and you get people developing documents in Microsoft Word, you have to make it easy for that user to be able to transfer that document to a common standard. Like, I don't know, they have to develop, the industry has to agree on a hybrid Word document that can be translated into any other application that's available, and then people
And
develop.
there have been attempts like things like the Open Document template, things
Yeah.
ODT versus DocX for Word documents and so on. So there have been attempts to do it, but companies deliberately resist this because they want to lock us into their ecosystem. And
Yeah.
that means you can't get out. You've got to continue throwing money at Apple and Microsoft and NVIDIA and so on because they lock you into their hardware.
But
And
this
that's the
lock
sort of
this
thing
lock
regulators should be attacking.
Yeah, because then you'll get innovation. You'll get other companies that come along. There can be no innovation now because nobody can compete because of all of this lock-in. And this lock-in also means what comes when you don't have competition, the incumbents just become just a bit shit. And we're going through that now. So we're having this high-tech age, which is a bit hopeless, where Word doesn't always open. Microsoft Windows crashes. By their own admission, their AI system is saying it's all held together with duct tape.
Yeah.
And AI is another thing. The number of times you feed something in to an AI engine and ask it a question, it comes back with something, and you go, oh no, I don't think that's the case because da-di-da-di-da-di-da. And it comes back and goes, yes, Phil, you're right. I mean, you cannot rely on AI. It's full of hallucinations and false information. I'd say more than 50% of the time, questions I ask are just plain wrong. You cannot depend on it. So we're putting up with mediocrity while the people delivering this mediocrity, because they face so little competition, are seeing their net worth increasing because the value of their companies have grown, in NVIDIA's case, 3,680% in the last 8 years, because there's no challengers doing a better job because of all the things we've been talking about. There's just something badly wrong, and the regulators don't care. In fact, even more so, politicians around the world are creaming themselves to try and get AI into their country, saying we've got to have the data centers. Donald Trump sort of like going, well, we don't want regulation. And they go, okay, we'll have less regulation. We'll have arm's length regulation just to try and get the, our piece of the pie, our piece of helping, which they won't get, our piece of helping these big companies get even bigger so that they fucking dominate the whole world. And there's only 6 companies left. Apart from that, I've got no opinion on this.
Yeah, and it's incredibly hard to break out of it. I've been through that experience of Microsoft, getting sick of Microsoft Windows crashing all the time, or as you say, I frequently started, and Word and PowerPoint wouldn't work. I had to turn the bloody thing off, restart it, and then for some reason they would work. 2 or 3 power resets later. It is in shitification, as Dory Cocteau coined that term, and you don't have the easy way out that exists with products which are independent of the network by which they're distributed. So, cars, all you need is roads, but with computer software, you need to have people who are using, what do you use? Do you use WhatsApp? Do you use Signal? All these different technologies? And you get locked in, potentially locked in, to the group you're communicating, and moving away is difficult. So in that world, you've got something which you shouldn't have a private ownership for. And this becomes the issue, because then if you do it, the well, and this is where our political system gets in the way, because regulators might well suggest that's a solution, but politicians who rely upon donations from various companies to be able to put up their campaigns together, I think those donations might have an impact on their policy decisions. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the other element of it, isn't it? That's why they've got it all locked up.
Mm.
And why would you get into this game? Because, as I've said, you can make a lot of money and you pay decent wages, but you don't employ very many people. So that 160,000 for each person in NVIDIA, those 42,000 people running in the biggest company in the world. Walmart is the biggest employer in the United States. It's got 1.6 million people working in the US. It pays an average salary of 44,000, which is somewhat less.
About one quarter, yeah.
It's and yet, and their revenue per employee is 330,000. So they're still making quite a bit. But then that revenue, but then they've got lots of other costs. Obviously, they've got all the distribution costs. They've actually got stores they've got to pay for as well. There's all of those are, they're fixed
physical costs which distribute the money they're earning through the rest of the economy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas
So
the
you can
NVIDIAs,
Yeah, exactly. And now the global labor share of income has been steadily falling. And it's now at the lowest level on record. So in the 50s and 60s, the global labor share of income was 56%. Last year, it was down to 46%, and it is just getting, every year, it gets that little bit lower. So that means the man in the street is earning a smaller slice of the pie every year. Now, the pie might be getting bigger. I know that's the counter argument, isn't it? Well, they're getting a smaller slice of what is a bigger pie. But someone's getting the rest of the pie, and we know who they are. They're just getting richer and richer.
Yeah, and this Marx made this case back in the 1800s, and he basically assumed the processes of capitalism would drive you into two extremely disparate groups, capitalists and proletariat, and the proletariat would get bugger all, and the capitalists would make a fortune. And what went wrong with that prediction initially was the dramatic expansion of the middle class, which Marx didn't factor in. So to run all these companies, you needed clerks and secretaries and runners, et cetera, and so there was a huge growth of middle class employment, and that's what gave us given all the other circumstances of the early 20th century, that's where you had the growth of the working class, quality working class consumption. You had trade unions to try to bargain for wages there. But first of all, economic theory advocated the abolition of unions, and so a lot of we've deliberately had policy to weaken the unions over time. So the bargaining power of workers has gone down, and then we've had more and more of these network goods where it's the network that matters, and that gives you the level of lock-in we're talking about. But another fundamental driver of all this, and this is now where AI is actually turning up as a phenomenon, the way we make output is by using energy to transform matter into more useful forms for us. So it's the energy throughput of machines which has really given us the wealth levels we're experiencing now. And the machines are basically replacing what humans can do at all times. You don't bother making a machine if it's cheaper to have a worker in that position. But as the machines get more sophisticated, more energy consumption, more capacity to control them, and so on, you can replace the need for labor in all those positions. And that's what we're seeing with AI. It's stuffing up. That's where one advantage is that AI is making a mockery of logic. In some cases, it's certainly doing some great work in mathematics, I've seen, but when you apply it to customer care, then it stops up completely.
Well, so imagine, well, exactly. So imagine if you were, approaching Microsoft and you went through Microsoft customer care and it said, really sorry about that, but, we're held together by duct tape. Or you went to an insurance company using the same AI system and said, and the AI system says, yeah, really sorry you're having difficulties. We're just a bit crap at insurance. But untamed, clearly that's what's happening. So you can't rely on it.
Yeah, and so we got the combination of incredible concentration of wealth and power and shitty products with lousy wages for the workers who are trying to cope in the middle of all of it.
All of those
and
things.
They're wondering why people are turning left wing and right wing, for that matter.
Exactly, for exactly the same reasons. Yeah, different ideas.
The center is empty because nobody lives in the center anymore. You're either ultra rich and doing very well, or ultra poor and complaining about it, either left wing or right wing ways.
Yeah. So left and right, it doesn't matter. They're both addressing the same issue. They've got a different solution, but at least they agree with what we've just described. And so, how do you fix it then? Because there's a whole load. It's not just it's the market dominance. It's that it's the fact that you get locked in. It's the network effects. The platform lock-ins as well. And Apple is incredible. I've just been trying to move my Apple account because I've got Apple TV, and I can't do it without an Apple device. I don't have an Apple device, so I just won't watch Apple TV anymore. There you go, Apple. You've lost all that revenue. I'll just I can understand actually why. I wouldn't say my kids do this, but kids of my kids' age are not paying any of these things because they are just getting it all off illegal sites. They're just getting the bootleg stuff because it's easier to do that than go through the fucking system you've got to go through that these companies put you through. But anyway, so you got all of that as well. So it's just the sheer incompetence, but the network effect. And then the thing is that if anyone wants to try and compete against them, not only are they competing against all of that, then they've also got to try and raise capital. And these companies, obviously, because they're so big, have got cheap capital. A lot of them, they've got their own profits, and then they get access to much cheaper capital than anyone else can get. They can issue bonds, like billions of dollars worth of bonds, and no one bats an eyelid.
Yeah. So we have more lock-in, and this is like, I remember Yanis Varoufakis putting across the point about techno-feudalism. The more I think about it, the more I think he's right. We're ending up in a proto-feudal system where you're lucky to have a job. You're lucky to be inside the manse rather than outside. Certainly the NVIDIA staff are, but you get effectively a two-class system because there's so much money made out of network effects, and it is like a feudal manse where the ownership of the land means you can charge people for being on the land, and that's what Apple does for if you log onto any Patreon site, you're paying 30% to Apple. Why Apple? Because they charge Patreon 30%. Period.
Yeah.
And it's just the lock-in effect, and there's no way to expect the market system to get around this. You have to attenuate it with what the government does. And of course, we've got a government dominated by people who believe the same nonsense that economics textbooks teach, where they don't even discuss the issues we're discussing here because, hey, we've got perfect competition. What's your problem?
Yeah, it's far from perfect competition. It's a very imperfect competition, isn't it? And it does, and I don't know, it's such a big task. But you have to say the network effect has to go. Whatever it is, you've got to have open standards. There's got to be a way that people can move from your platform to another platform. Your lock-in has got to go. You've got to win on the strength of your products. And I realize for most of them, that's going to be a bit of a problem because your products are shit.
Yep,
but that would be the only way. That would be the only way forward. And I don't know when anyone's going to get the balls to do that.
Yeah, well, balls are not something I associate with our current crop of politicians.
Not at all. All right. Well, it's a bit depressing, isn't it, Steve? But at least my AI friend, that made me laugh. Let me
read it out. It's a nice way to finish.
I'm just trying to find it again, actually. Where was it? It was, anyway, the gist of it was, Microsoft's AI talking about Microsoft. It's a giant creaking machine held together by duct tape, backwards compatibility, and sheer market inertia. AI can come up with some gems sometimes, can't it?
You nailed that one.
We'll see you next week, Steve. Thanks.
Okay, mate. See you then.